Now, today on Perspective, we're talking poetry. And be honest, if I say that, do you get a bit of a lump in your throat, perhaps, or a fear of the unknown? Or perhaps you're an ardent poetry fan? Well, if it's the former, don't worry, because hopefully we'll get rid of some of that fear for you in the next few minutes. Maybe even turn it into a love of poetry. That's because my guest today is on something of a quest to do just that. In her book, Fearless, Poetry in Perilous Times, Tracy K.Smith is a former US Poet Laureate, now Harvard professor as well, the author of 5 poetry collections, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning Life on Mars. And she's talking here in Paris later tonight as well. We'll talk about that in a moment. But thanks very much for coming in and talking to us on the programme. You say that poetry is often mischaracterised as inaccessible, irrelevant, or even intimidating, I suppose, is the big word. Why do you think that?
I think that after a certain age, people are asked questions that make poems feel like puzzles. When we're young, we have a natural sense of metaphor and play and even the illogic of dreams that feels natural to us. And as we get older, and oftentimes in school, poems are offered to us as things we must decode, as texts that have a single and indisputable meaning that we have to tap into. And I think it just locks something down within us.
Well, let's prove that, shall we? I know you've brought one of your books in today. You're going to read something for us. Okay. I mean, have a listen first of all,
all right.
and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Okay, this is a poem called "An Old Story," and I wrote it thinking about the many myths that we rely on that oftentimes justify violence, war, and our worst tendencies. And so this is an attempt to offer a new myth. An old story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate, swollen to a kind of epic wind. Livid the land and ravaged like a rageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke, and then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals, long believed gone, crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color.
I thought, just as you're reading it, you get those kind of, shivers down your spine and the tension kind of dissipates, doesn't it?
I feel like sometimes poems help me wrestle with my fears. And so this is a poem that comes from fear of a world that feels darkening and heavy. And I wanted to try and build another pattern of imagination, something that might lead toward a sense of courage in myself, a sense of possibility. Ultimately, the poem for me arrives at kind of recognition of the beauty in others, something that oftentimes we're taught to doubt or fear.
Yeah. So is your poetry always optimistic?
No. But because many of my poems begin from a form of unrest, I'm looking for an alternative logic or an alternative viewpoint that might make an ongoing problem feel at least partially surmountable.
And that phrase, perilous times, I mean, what is it about those times at the moment, I suppose, that makes you feel that poetry can help people, perhaps?
I think a lot of the peril that we live with is exacerbated by language, by the ways that we have adopted a shorthand for describing our enemies, shorthand for thinking about what is useful and good and who and what is negative and bad. I think poetry reminds us of the inexhaustibility of language and allows or encourages us to insist upon terms that are adequate to our complexity and to the complexity of others. And I think that's a form of hope.
And as a writer and as a poet yourself, I mean, was there a moment when you suddenly thought, I know, I'm going to be a poet? Or did it sort of develop in you? Where does the passion come from, I suppose?
I think it sprung up at many times. When I was very young, reading Emily Dickinson and Mark Twain made me think, I want to be a writer when I grow up. Yeah. When I got to college, I read Seamus Heaney's poetry for the first time and realized that it wasn't just a writer that I wanted to be, it was a poet. And I wanted to be able to write poems that activated memory, told stories of place and family that were as beautiful and powerful as his work.
And how do you transfer that onto other people? I mean, you're obviously good at talking about it. I can, I feel transformed myself. I'm sure the viewers do as well.
I think that reading poems aloud and talking about them with other people, allowing the language to kind of like get into your body and allowing your mind to go toward the places that the images and verbs lead is a really wonderful starting point. And in my lit classes and my poetry writing classes, we do that. And we also look at the tools that other writers have used to deal with the material that's important to them. And I ask my students to describe those tools and then to see if they can employ them in their own material. And I think that's a really great starting point for anybody who wants to get closer to poetry.
You've had a whole collection of different books, but the one that you're talking about tonight is the Fearless Poetry in Perilous Times. Tell us about the book. What is it within it? Because there are poems within it as well, aren't there? But also you're talking about the whole structure and a lot of the issues that you've been talking about just in the last 5 minutes or so.
I'm talking about the art form as something that can be useful to our lives, no matter who we are. I'm talking about it as a tool for dealing with and naming some of our most powerful and disorienting feelings, and that can be fear or grief, but also joy sometimes is so wonderful that it's disorienting, and poems help us to begin to get a grip on those types of things. I'm also arguing that poems can help us become better listeners to ourselves and, more importantly, to other people. And if we can learn to listen and even allow some form of recognition to emerge from the voice of a stranger on a page, I think it can help us to be more open and compassionate toward other people that we will come in contact with.
I mean, I'm sure everyone watching is going to agree with all the things you've said there. But is there a way sometimes that even writing poetry and talking about it, that inspires other people to try and write poetry as well? I mean, is it something that anyone can do?
Oh, I think it's definitely something that anyone can do. It's one of, the oldest human art forms. And in many ways, its relationship to song means that we're at home in it in a certain way. We have a visceral response to much of what poetry does. I love to declutter the imagination that kind of clouds that with worry or with a sense that poems have to look and sound a certain way when in reality it's an art form with infinite possibilities.
And you're in Paris tonight talking at Shakespeare & Company, the bookshop here in Paris. What's your hope for that?
Oh, I just hope I'll be able to meet other readers and lovers of poetry and maybe some skeptics who might be interested in thinking in different ways.
You like meeting the skeptics too?
I think it's great. When I was traveling as Poet Laureate, there were always people in the audience who said, I don't know about this art form. I feel intimidated by it. It doesn't make sense to me. And over time, even just in one single session, they would begin to say, oh, actually, this poem reminds me of something that happened in my life. And suddenly there's a bridge that can be crossed. And a little bit of the worry goes away about what this art form asks of us.
I'm sure there are some people watching now or who've seen you speaking who think, or seen your book, who think, wow, that's something that I actually said to her. And maybe she took it on board and came up with the book. So good to have you with us here on the programme to talk about it today. As I say, the book is called Fearless, Poetry in Perilous Times, and Tracy K.Smith will be talking about it at Shakespeare & Company this evening here in Paris, just if you happen to be, of course, in the area. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you.